What would it be like to trust names in code? Imagine a world where you read a name and you don't have to read the method. The name is that clear, that informative. Now that is actually a quote from Bache, creator of Naming as a Process, which is the topic of today's guided learning hour. Now I don't know about you, but the idea that you could just trust the names and the methods in your production code seems kind of utopian. With many of the code bases that I've worked with, it's a long way off. In this team learning session, we'll look at the big picture of naming as a process and how it could help you in your legacy codebase. Hi, I'm Emily Bache. I'm a software developer and creator of Saman Coaching. I would like to thank my sponsor, Tuple. They make a tool for remote ensemble and pair programming. A small, bootstrapped team of engineers who care deeply about software quality. I've tried Tuple and it worked well. It was really smooth, especially to switch who is typing. It feels great to partner with like-minded people and have Tuple as our first sponsor. If you're looking for a tool to make pair and ensemble programming easier, more effective and fun, check out the link in the show notes. This video is designed to be done with other people in your development team. The focus is on coding skills and team building. If you haven't seen one of these before, I recommend you watch to the end. The last part is a session briefing that explains the format. Today's session is about naming as a process, and we're using a shared online whiteboard that everyone should have access to. To begin with, let's read some methods and look at whether they have good names or not. Probably not. So I'm looking for your suggestions here. What should we rename these methods to so that they better describe what they do? Of course, I don't know what your groups have come up with, but I'm hoping you'll agree that the names that these methods started with aren't really very descriptive of what they do. And you could make improvements, perhaps by making them longer to say more about all the things that they're actually doing. Or you might disagree and think, well, it doesn't really matter, you're going to have to read the whole method anyway. But I think that could be a mistake, and I think a lot of people would agree with me that names are important and they should describe the functions. This is a quote from Bache. He says, "What would it be like to trust names? Imagine a world where you read a name and you don't have to read the method. The name is that clear, that informative." So he's painting a picture of a kind of utopia here, where when you're reading code, you don't have to read a lot of it because you can just read the method names and see what the stuff does, and you don't have to read the method bodies. And since we as programmers do spend a lot of time reading code, that could really be a big benefit and save us a lot of time, make it easier for us to update and change existing code. We'd like to have that. So Arlo has gone further and explained his 7 stages of naming, which is a process for improving names in code. And it's got this picture here that you might have seen. It's been quite influential, I think. That basically names start out as either misleading or not even present, sections of code that don't have a name. And you can improve matters just by giving them a nonsense name, giving them a name that actually is upfront about the fact we don't know what this does. And then hopefully you would be able to read the code and understand what it does well enough to make it honest, and then honest and complete, and then maybe the name says what it does and it does the right thing, and the structure of the code is improved, so you refactor it a bit in the structural way. But then you want to get it to express the intent of what's going on and a domain abstraction, ideally, with an object-oriented design. So this naming, 7 stages of naming has been around for some time. Arlo recently updated it, and he changed it to be called Naming as a Process, with 4 steps. I mean, 7's a lovely round number and everything, but actually he's identified that there are 4 main steps in this process. And he's named them Get Obvious Nonsense, Find Out What It Does, Split It into Chunks, Show Context. And he's written an article series all about each of these steps with lots of examples and explanations. I could go through this in more detail, but I think you'll get a better understanding of this with a demo. I'm about to do a demo of the Strange Characters refactoring kata, and I'm aiming to show the broad sweep of how naming as a process is supposed to work. So try not to get hung up on the details of the particular refactorings and tools that I choose, and look more at the big picture, how I'm transforming a long method into something far easier to read and understand. This example application comes with a console main entry point, which I'm going to run and show you what it does. So here it says I'm using a character file, strangecharacters.json, and it says, please enter a path to evaluate or type exit to exit the program. So I happen to know if I give it Byers/Will, it will return me a character, Will Byers, who is not a monster. I don't know if you're familiar with this Netflix show. It doesn't really matter, but it's a show with characters and there are monsters. Another character would be Byers Jonathan. And if I give it that path, /Byers/Jonathan, it will give me back that character. It also could tell me something about the monsters. If I give it a path that says it's a nemesis of Will Byers, then it will return a different character, the Mind Flayer, which is a monster. So that functionality is working, but there's another piece of functionality that we would like to be able to get from Will, who is the sibling of Will Byers. Well, it should be, of course, Jonathan Byers, but it's not working yet. And that's the starting position of this exercise. We want to try and add this new feature so that we can get the sibling of a character, not just the nemesis. Okay, so that's enough of that. This program is, of course, based on this piece of code. And what it's doing is using a character data parser, and it's calling probably initialize from file and stuff. And then it's using the same object to evaluate the path that you enter. So this function name, probably initialize file and stuff, is one of those names from Arlo's naming as a process. This is a name that is honest about what we actually understand about this function. We think it's probably initializing from a file, but it might be doing other stuff too. So we're being upfront about that in the name. So this name is in the process and probably could be improved. But at the moment, it's this function I'm actually interested in because I'm wanting to modify evaluate path to also be able to give me back a sibling. So here's the evaluate path function, and this is the one I probably need to change. So let me just scroll through this slowly and see if I can spot any code smells. Yeah, this is a long function, isn't it? It's not terribly badly indented. There might be some paragraphs here and there, although there aren't many comments. But I can probably improve the structure of this with naming as a process, which is what I'm going to do now, because I want to understand this function better before I start to change it. And naming as a process is also a way to read code and do safe refactorings on it. So looking at where this function is used, it's used in the program that we were just looking at, but also in some unit tests. So that's a bit of a luxury that you don't always have when you're working with legacy code. This code does actually have some unit tests, which I'm going to use as a safety net while I refactor. But honestly, the refactorings I'm going to do are probably safe enough to do even without that safety net. So don't worry if you haven't got unit tests. So the next thing I'm going to do is collapse all the code so I can see what's going on in this class. So character data parser, that's that other function that we noted earlier. We've also got applesauce, that's private. But again, that's one of the functions that's in one of those 7 stages of naming, or the naming as a process. That is a nonsense name. Applesauce is obviously nonsense. Nobody in their right mind would actually name a function that. It's a kind of a marker for, it does something we don't really understand yet. And Martin Fowler uses this in his book Refactoring, so it's not just Arlo and people associated with him. It's a common name to use. Then there's our evaluate path that we need to change, and we've also got a find character. Okay, so we're just to expand evaluate path one step. That gives me an overview of the whole function. Yeah, it's still not very easy to understand. We've got an argument here. How's it being used? Put the cursor on it. I can see it's only used in one place, to create a structure list. And the scope of structure list is really only the first part of this function. But what we're returning here is the character. So looking at the scope of the character variable, it's initialized right at the start, but it's only used in the second half. So that tells me that I want to do a refactoring here. I'm going to move that declaration closer to its assignment and run my tests. Yep, that seems to work. So I'll just make a little commit there. So move declaration closer to assignment. So that's a safe refactoring. What now? Well, that kind of implies that this piece of code might be a paragraph. I might be able to actually extract that and name it. Let's see what it comes up with. So yeah, it did manage to extract it as a method, and it thinks it should be called character nemesis. We've got a bunch of very odd looking arguments that it's come up with, but it is returning a character. So yeah, probably find character nemesis and stuff. So I'm moving directly from the naming as a process where I didn't have a name. I skipped the obvious nonsense because I think I've got a better idea. I can be honest that I think what it's doing is probably finding a character. So I'm going to try and name it by what I think it's doing. And that was a safe refactoring, but we should just commit that. If you like what you see here, please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And if you prefer a different programming language, you can buy other versions of this training. There's a link in the show notes. So can I do better than an honest name that is obviously not complete? I don't understand everything this does. So here I'm going to kind of skip over ahead a bit because actually this does find the character or the nemesis. So I'm going to rename this again. I did some more code reading that I'm not showing in this demo. But it does. It finds the character or the nemesis. And that is a better name for it. So now I've got to just run my tests. That was a safe refactoring, but still. And I'll commit that. Get to honest, complete name. So that, as I just to reiterate, I got to completely honest now. So the next step would be to perhaps split this into chunks after the different things that it does. But actually, I think that name is good enough at the moment. I want to go back to evaluate path because this name it's not missing. It's not very misleading, but it's also not very complete. And it's not very honest. I think I can do better. But now looking at this, I'm realizing that this first part of the function also perhaps chunks up into a thing I could extract, except it's kind of returning all of these things. And looking at these, this is the search criteria that we're using to find that character or the nemesis, which tells me another refactoring I should do here. I can transform my parameters and create a new class that encapsulate these search criteria. In fact, these are character search criteria. So now it's created me a new class, which I can extract as a variable there. So I'm using character search criteria to find a character or nemesis. Yes, that looks much better. So introduce class character search criteria. There we go, that's better. That was a pretty safe refactoring. And now this class, where is it declared it? Oh yeah, it's put it in the same file. Let's just move that to its own file. Put the cursor in the right place to move this to another file. Yeah, there we go. I think I want this at the top level. This is a domain concept. I've got character search criteria. Great. Let's commit that. Move class. So now what I want to do here is extract this bit as a method. Clearly this bit is a paragraph, which I can name. And in fact, the tool is even suggesting a good name for it. It's character search criteria, and since the argument is a path, I'm going to say from path. Character search criteria from path. There we go. So now this name is incomplete, but I've just found another missing name that I've converted to actually stage 2. So looking at my naming as a process, I went straight from missing to completely honest because I could work out what this does. So I'm doing pretty well. I've got several names now which are kind of completely honest, but I really kind of got some chunks here. So actually what this does now is this method here. This converts path to search criteria and find character. So that's a better name than evaluate path, I think. That moves us to completely honest here as well. So we've got a lot of honest names going on here. I should definitely be committing this. Okay, so now the next steps in naming as a process are all about trying to move the chunks to where they belong and introduce domain concepts. So we've got a domain concept here. We've got this character search criteria class, and it occurs to me that this function has major feature envy on that class. And in fact, it's kind of a factory function for instances of it, because that's the last thing it does here at the end, constructs one. So I think this needs moving onto that domain concept, and that's going to make our code more expressive. So I want to move this to the character search criteria. I've got a little warning pops up here saying it's going to increase the access rights, but that's fine. It just makes it public over there. So here I've moved it onto this class. It's a kind of factory function, so I'm going to make this private, and I think that should still work. Run the tests. Yeah. So let's make a commit. So that was a safe refactoring move method, and now it probably could have a better name. This in fact could be simplified. So I've got the steps here that I'm trying to show context, and if I go back to where this is used in character data parser, this name is unnecessarily long. I can rename this now. Better to match the domain. Just from path will be enough because I know what class it's on. So it's just character search criteria from path. So now I've got my much more expressive, shorter name here. And actually, I can do something similar on this. Here, the feature envy is on character finder. So I want to actually move this method onto character finder. If I look at this character finder class, I think it fits much better here. Just show the structure view here. You can see the character finder has got lots of functions to do with finding characters with different criteria, and this new method, find character by search criteria, would fit right in this class. So I think this is a much better home for it. So here in character data parser, I want to move it to this. So in order to, this is a static function, but this character finder here needs to be an argument of the class because I want to move it properly to be a member of that class. So introduce parameter, finder, yeah, that's fine. So that was a safe refactoring. Make a commit, introduce parameter. And then if I move this now over to character finder, to move it there, character finder, and it's saying it's going to need to make it public, which should be fine. So now if I go over to character finder, where did it put it? Let's put it at the bottom, I bet. Yeah, there it is. And now I can make this non-static because I've got an instance of the class in the argument list and it's easy to do. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. Test still passing. So that was another safe refactoring move method. So going back to my character data parser where I started, this method has changed name from evaluate path to something that's a bit more honest and complete. I've split it into chunks, I've got pieces, and these chunks now actually have good names for the domain. So I'm pretty sure that I've got to the a position now where this evaluate path method could be usefully inlined. But I'm going to stop there because I think that's enough of demoing naming as a process. I think you get the idea. Basically, you're spending all your time finding better abstractions and moving names along the process. now it's your turn. I've got a little exercise for you. There's these two names in character data parser, which are at different stages in the naming as a process. This one is obvious nonsense, and this one is honest but incomplete. And I think what it would be good for you to do is just to try this out. Try out naming as a process and see if you can improve these names. There are some instructions here on the activity board explaining to where to get the code and which names it is I want you to improve. You can also refer to the articles that Arlo has written about naming as a process if you want to check them up, but hopefully my demo has given you a flavour of what you're trying to achieve. Just at the end of the exercise, when the timer's run out, perhaps your facilitator will remind you again, but I want you to take a screenshot or a copy of your new names and paste it onto the activity board so that all the other groups who you're working with can also share their names and you can compare notes. What names did you come up with? What are the differences between them? So the stage at the end of the exercise is share the names that you've come up with, and then the next part will be a discussion. But I'll explain that when you get there. Great, so I hope you've had a good time renaming these methods and you've come up with something better than what we had before. So now I'd like you to have a bit of a discussion. I don't know what names you've come up with, but when I was thinking about this and when I've done this exercise, I think the names go through these kinds of stages. And I don't know how far along these stages you've got to or whether you've chosen something else, but this is largely what we're expecting. Applesauce is obvious nonsense. Probably initialized from file and stuff is expressing what it does, but at some point you might get to a stage where you say, well, it certainly reads from a file and creates characters and nothing more. And that would be an honest, complete name. If you get as far as splitting it into chunks, you might find, well, it first reads the character data from a file and then creates the characters with that data. So those are the two chunks I think this method has. And then ultimately, if you're getting to the stage of showing context, maybe you get a name that was something like characterfactory.fromFile that expresses in this domain, we've got characters and we're making a character finder from the file, something like that. Your names may be better than these, but I want to illustrate that names go through steps and stages, and each one, the name should be a little better than it was before. And you're not going to jump straight to the best possible name. You've got to see this as a process that your code goes through. The thing is, though, of course, you're making commits and sharing your code potentially after each of these stages in naming as a process. So if you're coming to a code base with developers who are using this, you're going to see some strange names in the code that you might not be expecting. And sometimes people get a bit upset about this and think, well, it's unprofessional. You shouldn't have things called applesauce in your code. That's wrong. Or you can't say probably in a method name. I wouldn't like that. And your team might decide that you don't like this and you don't want to do this. Or you might see it's useful and you could adopt this. But that's for your team to decide. So now I want you to have that discussion. Talk about this. So I've got a little discussion question here. You've shared all the names that you've come up with. Would you want to see these names in your code? When the alternative could be names that are misleading or missing or vague? I don't know. What do you think? Have a discussion, perhaps write some notes and see what you come up with for your team. Cool. So I hope I've awakened your interest in this technique from Arlo Bache. Perhaps today you'll find somewhere in your code where the method name is just so bad that you feel inspired to rename it applesauce, and that everyone in your team will actually know what you mean by that. Happy coding! This is the session briefing, intended for the developer or coach who's going to host this team learning session. Now, if you haven't done one of these before, I've got another video, Guided Learning Hour How To, with more information. You'll also need supporting materials, code samples, activity board. The code's on GitHub, and board is available through Patreon. If you like this content, please subscribe to my channel and like the video. In this particular guided learning hour, there are several points where I ask you to pause the video and lead activities with your team. If you're not yet fluent with refactoring and using tools like extract method, you might find it challenging to complete this exercise in the time allowed. And it could be a good idea to book another session, repeat the same exercise again. You'll be able to train fluency with your tools and hopefully get further with it the second time. In the Connect, you want to get people to start talking and thinking about names. So put them in breakout rooms with a time limit, not too long, just long enough that they could read the code at their own pace and work out that the names of these methods are not very good, and I'm sure they could come up with better suggestions. And you can watch the board zoomed out and see when they've started to write those suggestions on the board to give you an idea of whether they need more time. But don't spend too long on this. Really, these names are bad and these functions are very hard to actually come up with good names for them. For the main coding exercise, again, you're going to be working in pairs. And this is actually a pretty short exercise. A lot of my guided learning hours, you have more coding time than this. I really just want people to have enough time to do a couple of renames and start thinking about what they would call these functions. And then share their names with everyone in the group. So you've got a few suggestions for each one. I mean, I'm hoping that they'll at least rename applesauce to something better and hopefully move the name containing probably and stuff to something a little bit more descriptive that contains more information about what it does, but perhaps isn't quite completely honest yet. I mean, I don't think people should be spending a long time on this. Reading code takes time, and I mostly just want people to get the idea that you rename things and then you learn more and you rename it again. And that's how naming as a process works. It's in the conclusions that I think you'll get most of the benefits of this session. This really is supposed to be a team-building activity where you and your team discuss stuff. So if you can all stay in the same room to discuss together, that's good, and look at all the names that you've come up with. But if you're a larger group, a larger team, then perhaps split into breakout rooms, but not the same ones as before. Mix people up so that they can talk about the names that their room came up with and compare with the other people that they're talking to. So this really is about getting people to understand the implications of naming as a process. What would it be like if you adopted this? And hopefully they'll realise that it means that they're going to see some strange names in their code that could live for, weeks or months. But that's okay, so long as the names are always getting better. You will get much more out of this session and all my guided learning hours if you can persuade your team to join you. And don't forget, there are additional resources available from me and the Saman Society. If you do try it, let us know how it goes on social media. Saman Coaching, it means growing excellence in coding. Together,